The weapon you now hold is a physical, tangible representation of both the divine and the savage, of serenity and untamed ferocity. The scythe is not only a weapon, but a symbol. Perhaps its greatest lesson is that the traits of tranquility and furor exist within all living beings, and sometimes the best we can hope for is to find balance. May the Scythe of Elune grant you the strength to destroy your enemies and the wisdom to know when to stay your hand. The story of the origins of the Worgen ends where it blends with the present in World of Warcraft in the Gilnean starting zone. But that does not conclude the story of the Scythe of Elune or the Alpha Prime. If you have not watched my lore video on the Curse of the Worgen, you can find it here. So now, the story continues with the whereabouts of the Scythe of Elune and the unfortunate Night Elf who acquired it during those thousands of years between the Worgen's banishment to the Emerald Dream and the Fall of Gilneas. Today, should you investigate the story of the Scythe of Elune yourself in the game, there's a gap in history. The gap surrounds the story of Velinde Starsong, a Kaldorei sentinel who found the scythe after the Cenarian Circle had hidden it from the world once the Worgen had been sentenced to eternal sleep in the Emerald Dream. But if you play WoW Classic before the release of Cataclysm, you will get Velinde's entire story and how the Scythe of Elune was found before the Legion expansion. As most of you know, in Legion, balanced druids can acquire this old and sinister artifact. I have made a guide on how to do so. For those who wish to skip the investigation yourself on the Scythe of Elune, grab yourself a cup of tea, get comfortable, and join me as we begin with the Fall of Gilneas. After Auragal opens a gateway between the realm of Azeroth and the Emerald Dream, the Alpha Prime and his Worgen tear through friend and foe, turning Gilneans along the way to join their ranks of beasts. King Gen Greymane himself is turned but escapes the city, and those who do not make it out of Gilneas and to Teldrassil lose their lives and their sanity to join the ranks of the Alpha Prime. What is taking place in Gilneas does not escape the Kaldorei, and Belysra, who is now thousands of years old due to the gift of immortality, hears about the chaos and destruction in the city. As you may recall, Belysra was the former wielder of the Scythe of Elune, and she was essential to the imprisonment of the Worgen in the Emerald Dream. She is horrified by the bloodshed Auragal has caused, but is unable to help without the scythe. As mentioned in the video about the Worgen Curse, only the Cenarian Circle knows where the scythe is at this point, and they are not telling. But we do know that not just Belysra, but the Alpha Prime himself sought the weapon after the Worgen's escape from the Emerald Dream. But the scythe is hidden well from Worgen and from us as players. Some of you might have wondered, but there are so many clans of Worgen out in the world now. How can that be when the story so far has only told us of the Alpha Prime and his pack? Well, I shall tell you, for the scythe was far from done causing harm and distress on Azeroth. Velinde Starsong was a Kaldorei sentinel and priestess patrolling Ashenvale Forest and Fellwood. She was known as capable and trustworthy, and was given a grim and dangerous task of ridding the forests of demons. In WoW past Cataclysm, you can find very little information about Velinde, and as a matter of fact, she's a bit of a mystery. You come across her spirit in a mine in Duskwood, which is very far from the forests of Ashenvale. Let me tell you her story. Velinde is tasked with taking out the demons in Felwood, sometime between the banishment of the Worgen to the Emerald Dream and the Fall of Gilneas. As mentioned, she was a strong warrior and wielded powers befitting of a priestess of Elune. It is thus no surprise that she had success in Felwood, seeing the demons' numbers dwindling as she took them out. But then, rather suddenly, her efforts seemed to falter. The story does not tell us why. Rather, it tells us how Velinde grew anxious and desperate, fearful for her life. Although she never asked for help from the other sentinels, so they never knew of her struggle. Only Elune did, if she listened at all to Velinde's eternal and persistent prayers for help and guidance. All her fellow Kaldori knew was that Velinde suddenly disappeared from Felwood, leaving her task incomplete. And it wasn't until later that they found out what terrible measures Velinde had taken in her fight against the demons. At that point, it was too late to save her or the forest. In the disclosure of what happened to Velinde, we also find out what had happened to the Scythe of Elune. Before Cataclysm, Velinde's journal can be found in Darnassus through the quest Velinde's Effects. In it, she discloses the horrible mistake she made. As Velinde was carrying out her task in Felwood, she slowly started to become overwhelmed by the demons. She became fearful for her life and desperate to carry out her orders to not fail her fellow sentinels. And so she prayed to her goddess Elune. And she did so for many days, perhaps even weeks, until eventually she came upon a book in Darnassus. A book written by none other than Fandral Staghelm, who wanted to expose Malfurion for his past mistakes. Those who do not know, Fandral Staghelm became the archdruid of Darnassus in Malfurion's absence, while the druid was lost in the Emerald Nightmare many thousands of years ago. Staghelm eventually became corrupted by the Nightmare Lord and is the first druid of the Flame whom we take out during our battle against Ragnaros. In the book, Velinde reads the story of the War of the Satyr, and more importantly, learns about a powerful weapon which was essential to the Kaldori victory over the demons. Yes, the Scythe of Elune and the Worgen forces the staff created. Staghelm, of course, omits the curse of the Worgen and the misfortune that befalls those who try to control the beasts. Staghelm knows about the staff's whereabouts, and soon Velinde ventures to her aunt Melthandra's grave, where the staff was hidden all those thousands of years ago. How Fandral Staghelm knew about the location of the scythe is another mystery, but knowing the connection between the nightmare and the Emerald Dream, it is not altogether surprising that Staghelm would have learned about the faith of the scythe, as he himself was corrupted by and forever bound by the nightmare. Velinde Starsong and Fandral Staghelm provide the solution to the biggest mystery of the Scythe of Elune, but they only do so in WoW Classic, which is rather interesting. Whether Elune led Velinde Starsong to the book and the location of the scythe is uncertain, but very unlikely. For she had tried to control the rage of Galdren, and both she and the scythe failed. But the ancient wolf spirit Galdren, on the other hand, is another matter. His ferocity caused the insanity of the druids of the pack, and his bloodlust cursed the Scythe of Elune to turn the Worgen into the beasts they eventually became, to spread the curse of their blood. Velinde now finds herself holding one of the most powerful weapons in World of Warcraft history. And though she knows very little about the scythe, Velinde takes the weapon and is immediately overcome by a vision. In it, she discovers the weapon's incredible power to weaken barriers between realms and time. The vision is of chaos, of the savage battle between the Worgen and the Lords of the Emerald Flame during the War of the Satyrs. How much is shown to Velinde is uncertain, but if the Scythe is channeling the will of Galdren, it would make sense to omit the aftermath of the War of the Satyrs. The ancient wolf spirit is at this time deceased, but ancients have power even through the realms of death, and Velinde is no druid. Velinde is of course naive to the warning signs and believes the scythe to be a gift from her goddess, because wasn't it Elune who led her to the book in Darnassus? You and I know that the goddess would never lead someone to release the beasts which had been tamed and sent to slumber forever. But Velinde focuses on the power of the scythe, and quickly she is able to communicate with the Worgen who stir from their sleep in the Emerald Dream. Though slumbering, the beasts are still strongly connected to the item which made them. Without speech, Velinde realizes the Worgen understand her and her call for their aid in Felwood, and upon returning to the forest, she does not hesitate to weaken the barrier between Azeroth and the Emerald Dream. And a pack of Worgen is called forth, released from their prison. While their comrades fight in Gilneas, the Worgen summoned by Velinde follow her into the battle against the demonic forces in Felwood. Velinde tasks the strongest of them with leading delegations, impressed with their abilities to work together to take down their foes. And once again, the savage strength and ferocity of the Worgen bring victory to their summoner, just like they did for Aragorn. And Velinde, too, is blind to the dangers she's putting herself and Azeroth in. She summons more Worgen, never hesitating to question why they were banished in the first place. She thinks she's following the will of Elune. After a while, Velinde notices that more Worgen start to appear without her calling, without her having to use the scythe. And she realizes that the scythe no longer needs her call to tear down the barriers to the Emerald Dream. And then some of the Worgen start to disappear from the forest. Though she sends out Worgen scouts to locate their comrades, she loses more and more of her forces and begins to grow worried. Velinde is naive, blinded by her faith in Elune, but she does realize the danger and power of the Worgen and starts to question her actions. She consults with the libraries in Darnassus again, where she first learned about the Scythe of Elune, and she speaks to the Circle of Ancients in Darkshore, but to no avail. Growing increasingly anxious, Velinde finally hears about a particular mage from Dalaran, a mage who also summoned Worgen, though without the use of the scythe. At this point in time, Gilneas is most likely fallen, or is close to, with Aragorn corrupted and driven insane by his mistakes. But sentenced to seclusion in Felwood, Velinde is unaware and departs from the forest to seek out Aragorn. This is why Velinde's fellow sentinels find her disappeared from the forest, and why we can eventually find the Kaldorei in Duskwood, because she never makes it to Dalaran. Instead, she is intercepted in a mine in Duskwood by a subject of the Alpha Prime. Do you remember how Alpha Prime himself wanted his hands on the scythe? So too did another powerful Worgen who sought to usurp his leader's power. Worgens was his name, and with 3 followers he tracks down Velinde, possibly drawn to her by the power of the scythe itself, and corners her in Roland's doom. And here, Velinde unfortunately meets her fate. She falls back into and tries to hide in the mine, overwhelmed and standing little chance against the Worgen. Unlike Belysra, Velinde is no druid and there is no record of Velinde ever wielding power enough herself to defy the power of the Worgen beasts. So she tries to hide, but to no avail. Though she's not torn apart by the Worgen, the Kaldorei is crushed by rocks as a torch ignites nearby dynamite. We do not know what happens to Vargas here, but one can guess he and his followers too were killed by the cave-in. The Scythe, now buried in the rubble of Roland's tomb, is found by a member of the Defias Brotherhood who have infiltrated the area. His name is Jitters, and his harrowing account of the events that befell him upon touching the scythe can be read in Jitters' completed journal today. They came at us from everywhere, clawing from hidden holes at our feet and dropping upon us from silent perches above. Half our men fell in those first panicked minutes. The rest, including myself, tried to flee. As I ran, I saw so many of my brothers taken by tooth and claw, heard so many screams cut short and gurgled to silence. For all I know, I'm the only human to escape that place. The barrier between the Emerald Dream and Azeroth is so thin at this point that just by touching the ruined wood of the staff, Jitters triggers the summoning of Worgen who overrun the mine. How the man escaped without a bite and a taste of the curse is a miracle, and though he escapes with the scythe, he is now doomed the surrounding area to inhabit Worgen to this very day. From here on, the scythe changes hands a few times, while it is hunted by black riders from Deadwind Pass. Mysterious and seemingly immortal riders who hunt rare and powerful artifacts. The artifact results in the death of Sven Jorgen's family at the hands of the Black Riders, before the SI7 agent Brink reclaims the scythe from the Riders and brings it to Velinde Starsong. With this, the scythe is brought back into Kaldorei hands and to someone who knows the story and the danger of the weapon. Only a few days after acquiring the item, Velinde ventures to Gilneas to the battle with the Alpha Prime's forces. The Kaldorei warrior knows the scythe and knows it must be brought to Belysra to stop the rampage of Alpha Prime. But the scythe ends up not being enough to stop the Worgen leader, and as he overpowers Belysra, he takes up the scythe for himself. And what happens next can be read in the artifact book text from Legion about the history of the Scythe of Elune. It is the accounts of Belysra Starbreeze as she battles her former friend and comrade Relar Fangfire, the Alpha Prime, and finally puts an end to the horrors of her past. It had been Alpha Prime's foremost goal to retake the Scythe of Elune. He still harbored resentment towards the Archdruid Malfurion for spurning him when he was simply Relar Fangfire, the druid who wanted to take on the pack form during the War of the Satyr. Prime wished to use the scythe to call forth his brethren from the Emerald Dream to besiege our beloved home of the Arnesses. I battled the Alpha Prime to the limit of my abilities, but even my greatest efforts proved insufficient. Prime took up the scythe and was prepared to summon his Worgen brethren when he was vanquished by a phantom. The spirit essence of my fallen love Arvel, who had promised millennia ago that not even death would keep us apart. My love kept his promise, and the Scythe of Elune remained in my keeping. Belysra further reports returning to Duskwood with Velinde Starsong scythe in hand. She wishes to further study the Worgen and grant the creatures peace with the scythe. Whether she succeeds or not, you and I can discuss, but she does meet the players in Duskwood during the Druid Class Hall campaign. As a balanced druid, you get sent to Duskwood to meet up with Velinde Starsong and Belysra Starbreeze, who still lives thousands of years old. You're told that Tyrande, High Priestess of Elune herself, has kept the Scythe's powers safe and hidden from the wrong hands. Judging from that description, and the fact that the Worgens still run rampant all over Azeroth, something tells me that Belysra did not succeed in bringing peace to the story of the Worgen. And that concludes the story of the Scythe of Elune and Velinde Starsong. Once more, you and I as players in World of Warcraft continue the story of the weapon until the end of Legion, when all artifacts are drained of power to neutralize the Sword of Sargeras in Silithus. There are still some gaps, some small unanswered questions to this day concerning the Scythe. One of how the Worgen spread to corners of Azeroth like Northrend and Mount Hyjal. The Dark Riders of Duskwood are also shrouded in mystery. They're led by Eredin and used to be a group of traveling merchants before they were cursed by the sorcerer Medivh. Now, their hunt for ancient relics appears eternal, but that's a different story for a different day. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Remember to watch my guide on how to get the Scythe of Elune yourself or any other artifact weapon. Links are in the section below. And if you have any parts of WoW lore you want me to cover, leave a comment below. Take care.